Hello and welcome to LedgerCast. My name is Brian Krogsgaard. We've got a special guest with us here today, Stani Kulechov. Oh man, I messed it up.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Kulechov. Say that one more time.
Yeah. Kulechov.
Kulechov. All right, the southerner in me just messed it up totally. I try hard on those, but I didn't get it quite right. It's a pleasure to have you here today. You know, this episode of LedgerCast is brought to you by Matcha, another great product in the DeFi space. Go to ledgerstatus.com/matcha to check them out. Make your first DEX trade today if you hadn't done it already. Or maybe wait a minute until the fees come down a little bit. When the fees are a little lower, it's certainly easier. But buy the dips when people go to bed and the fees come down a tad. We're going to talk about scaling quite a bit, I imagine, here on this phone call. Stani, welcome.
Thanks, Brian, for having me here. It's definitely an interesting time. And those fees are painful at the moment. But, scaling is something that is coming into Ethereum and elsewhere. So it's not end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's a sign of adoption, but then it's also this massive roadblock on people that are looking to participate. Let's just dig right into that, right? You open up, Aave, people can go to aave.com, aave.com, and this is the classic DeFi example that I like to give. It's lending, it's borrowing, you remove the middleman, and there's this concept of governance by the people in a decentralized project. That's what you are building. V1 is up. V2 is live, or getting. You're going to talk about V2 today. What are the biggest challenges that you face today? Let's just start right there. What are the biggest challenges that you face today with Ethereum's growing network, and honestly, Aave's like massive adoption that you've seen in such a quick amount of time?
I think in terms of like biggest issues at the moment, I would say that, of course, like I would say like one of the challenges we have is liquidity, which is a funny thing because at the same time, and this is not just Aave but DeFi ecosystem, like there's a big demand for stablecoins at the moment, and obviously that can be seen in the rates in Aave. I mean, there's past 30 days rates in terms of in terms of like the deposit rates are somewhere in 10% API, and compared to the kind of traditional dollar, not the crypto dollar stablecoin, but just dollar interest yields without fixed periods, they are close to zero or under 1%. So there's massive arbitrage at the moment. And one of the issues is that how to get that, dollar liquidity into DeFi at the moment. This is the biggest kind of like a bottleneck, and how to do it in a way that you can scale to millions of people in a way that the whole network isn't clogged, and that you could use something like Aave with low costs. It's like the thing is that Aave is what it's doing in its core. It's democratizing practically finance, and especially like interest rate markets. So when you deposit to Aave, let's say from Europe, from Asia, you basically you have the same rate. So if you deposit the same amount, regardless where you're located, you're paying. You're getting the same. So it's very democratic. But the thing is that when you go to lower amounts and you're in regions where, average, let's say, incomes are lower, savings are lower in amounts, the yield that you get, the transaction fees are eating the yield there. And that is something that we are trying to solve in a way that how we can get more people to get access to this democratic, liquidity market and decentralized finance without having to suffer, from the fees. And and I think we're getting there, but I think now we are in this very a funky position because we get adoption and then we at the same time we have high fees,
Yeah.
and it's pretty weird problem to have.
Yeah, so let's back up a minute. What you don't see is I've got a screen share showing like the APY for deposits and the borrow APR. This is the part that's super democratic, right? Like you said, anyone in the world, it doesn't matter your jurisdiction, your banking access, whatever. If you have access to the blockchain, you can deposit, stable coins or crypto assets and earn a yield on that, and then also have access to fully collateralized borrowing mechanisms. And it doesn't matter any of those things or any of your own stuff, like your credit history. Like if you've got the crypto or the stuff to deposit to back it, then you can borrow against that no matter what else is at stake. And then the part that you say that's the opposite, and this is kind of that interesting dilemma, is I haven't done this in a while, but if I wanted to put even say, especially these lower dollar amounts, right? I want to put $1,000 on the platform to earn this 10% yield, which is you can't find that in a traditional institution, nothing like it. But let's say I can get this 10% yield, but it might cost me $200 to interact with the smart contracts to deposit my $1,000. Or maybe not quite that much, but it's a lot, right? So that's what you're saying in terms of the opposite end of that spectrum, because especially certain countries, when they want to earn yield, it's very difficult for them. So
Yeah.
Now you're saying there's multiple ways to go about fixing that, right? So there's some native stuff that I'm sure you're working on to try to make the contracts simpler or more efficient to interact with, and then there's going to be layer 2 or other types of interactions. Where is your focus today to try to really bring down that barrier to entry for interacting with Aave?
Yeah, I think we have kind of like we have done a lot of work like internally, like on contract levels, but there's so much you can optimize, and I mean we're very good now at at actually gas optimization. Like that's where we are now good because we've been doing it for the past like six or more months, and I think beyond that, like what we're trying to figure out is that if you have this vast amount of users, they basically are able to access, but they're able to access Ethereum or some other network, and they have ways to get into those networks. But the problem is that when they have to transact, it becomes them very costly. So we're trying to figure out like how we could serve those user bases and apply still enough security that practically it makes them that they get the blockchain experience. So the blockchain experience is not, the users are not getting it if you have a network where there's just few nodes running it, and that's like the setup. That's not blockchain. That's something else. But that's slightly more decentralized than, like, let's say, centralized server.
Yeah, like if you extract the decentralization too much, then you might as well just be like a normal fintech company or something, right?
Yeah, and in many cases you could use something like just like a database or some. So, but see, there are use cases where you just need 15 nodes, but the reputation of those nodes are just super high that it just makes sense that, okay, for this particular use case, it's totally fine to use something like this and then use the Ethereum settlement layer as a way of actually depositing funds or keeping the bigger amount of funds, but letting users to transact in a side chain or side chain and then rolling up on the main chain, like settling transactions periodically to the main chain.
And how different is that from if you were to use like layer 2? Have y'all made any decisions about using optimistic or anything like, specific technologies on layer 2?
Yeah, the thing is that there's still a bit of like kind of like what we wait and see to understand how some of these layer 2 solutions will work. I've seen very interesting applications on zk sync in terms of like a zk implementation. Starkware is doing a great job on zk side. Or the OVM optimistic team is doing interesting there, and it's a different model based on actually like the idea that you interact, like that you kind of like you can dispute if the transactions aren't, or the exits aren't like what they're supposed to be, and if they're fraudulent, and then of course like there's other interesting solutions, but I think it's really about where people are going and where you can onboard. So if you look at Matic, for example, and they branded to Polygon, and
Yeah.
if you look at what's happening there, they kind of like were early on being able to attract, there's like a gaming any ecosystem. Then they were able to attract Aave, which is one of the Aave ecosystem projects, into their chain. And Aave, they migrated the whole kind of community there, which is pretty cool thing to do.
Right.
And and you see kind of like there's also like this composability happening there, and and in other places as well. So I guess like this composability is also like building culture, and when there's like ecosystem, then it's a place to be. It's becomes a party instead of like a
yeah. You're
empty building.
You're collaborating multiple projects, kind of coming together and ending up with a better user experience overall, right?
Yeah, and I think we don't have like in Aave. What's important to us that we should not be selective. Like we should always think of like where is innovation, and follow that and innovate ourselves, and be very inclusive on decisions that we make, that we can support various communities and be in multiple places at the same time. And I think this is kind of like our layer 2 or scaling strategy.
So how does the governance mechanism fit in with that? So one component of this, and this is something, when I was learning about what are the DeFi options for these different products, you hear about kind of the majors with Compound and Aave, and the way that it was explained to me was that Aave was more open to community insight, or maybe like a true governance system. I could get your update on that, in terms of saying, hey, this can be used as collateral, or this could be borrowed, and really listening to the community about how to make decisions for the platform. Whereas Compound seemed a lot more, at least centralized in the sense of how they go about their plan for the development of the product. So
what's Compound?
Like what is You're gonna leave me out there, aren't you? And so that appealed to me, right? Because it's like, they're listening, and they're willing to be adaptive to what their actual community is asking for. So how does that process work? How much is it just listening and then, an internal team making decisions versus on-chain decision-making or protocols for going about bringing, these changes to the network?
I think in terms of like decision-making, end of the day, like the community decides, but it really, what I see, like what has a lot of effect is actually the discussions there in the governance forum. So when there's a topic listing, and you kind of see like, of course, we have if you don't calculate take into account this kind of like asset listing where there's some of the team members or a community member from other community comes and posts a asset listing and brigades like 100 accounts there to say like this is very good for the Aave community. But like when there's actually like a lot of thought in those proposals, I think like that is where the kind of tweaking happens, and then at some point that particular governance post might evolve a bit, and then there's this kind of like consensus that forms during that post, and there is some interesting feedback and input on things that has been there. But in terms of like, how much of the proposals come from the Genesis team and how much comes from the community? That's quite interesting because some of the things we actually think internally as well, like in our team, that hey, maybe we could actually start thinking about something like this. And at the same time, someone comes maybe and posts very similar kind of thing, and we usually that's amazing in the sense that many of the approaches that some of the community members are coming with are even more elegant that our team is doing, which is amazing. Like, because you really see like there's sort of value. And I think when it comes to like community development, we're still working quite hard to have a network of developers just contributing. And this is something we're now working by creating a grants program that can be managed by the governance, and that should kickstart also like the community development process. And like, if you look at, for example, what's happening in Linux, like in open source world, each Linux release has 2,500 contributors, and most of those contributors aren't actually volunteers; they're just paid people contributing either within a company or by the Linux Foundation. And I think like it takes Aave for a long time to achieve something like that, maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
But I wish the DeFi ecosystem gets it like fairly quickly.
And what can happen too, I come from the web space as well, and specifically like content management systems and the WordPress ecosystem. And it's similar, it's smaller, of course, than Linux. But, over 10 years, there's what happens is there's corporations within an ecosystem that have incentives for a particular protocol, like for the broad protocol, but they make money because they have a plugin or something that works on top of the protocol. So then they are incentivized to have people on their team be part of the development process of the underlying protocol. So someone that's making a SEO plugin for the content management system, well, they're going to put their developers as working on the main content management system. Is that kind of how you see development could be really diversified outside of the core team over time? It's like people that are saying utilizing Aave's protocol underneath their product, like they're going to be incentivized to participate in Aave development itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. That exactly the WordPress community works kind of like the traditional like open source community.
Yeah.
And for example, if you look at Linux, some of the developers are working in big tech, other companies, so that the underlying software becomes mission critical. And it is. I mean, it's Linux. I mean, it's running on 99 point something like servers. And same with Aave protocol. I mean, that's practically a kind of like a new backend for finance,
a backbone of DeFi. So it's important. I mean, and we've seen the opposite spectrum of that also from the web space is like when you see these like random, hardly maintained like NPM packages that just kind of sneak into everything. Somebody finds a way through, and it's like, like this whole thing's in trouble because Joe stopped developing this because he was, doing it all by himself, and there's no incentives for other people to be part of that process.
So that's crazy. So I've been thinking this quite a lot, and every time you install a, let's say, an NPM, what happens is that you see projects that are looking for funding, and then you can go and check like what's still. Then you see like contact details. Imagine you just have like Ethereum address where you could just like tip them, or there's some sort of like incentives there. Like that's so interesting to see. But you know what? I think also like I do believe that, let's say if Aave becomes important for traditional finance to participate because of the fact that it's growing so fast and there's constant innovation, and it's difficult to create something outside DeFi without being in this internet, because DeFi is becoming now internet, and you can't anymore like create a separate network and just not get the value if you come from traditional finance. I could imagine that traditional finance, let's say banks are contributing, financial institutions are contributing to build the code and contribute into the code base. But also, what will happen is that because the difference between the Linux ecosystem and let's say the ecosystem of WordPress is that now you have this decentralized governance, and they have treasuries, and they have ways to incentivize. So we have actually even direct ways of getting grants. So there will be this also like a group of community developers that are working to the DAO directly, and it's going to be probably a mixture of both of these models.
And you'd hope that, and this is not exactly something banks are known for, but you'd hope that over time they start to realize that by contributing in this open source ecosystem, they end up getting a whole lot of infrastructure, for free for their own products.
Yes. Thank you for saying that out loud. So this is like, if you look at like how financial institution infrastructure looks like, it's a total it's not even jungle. It's something even more madness, because you have a infrastructure where you have legacy on top of legacy on top of legacy, and then like changing that, doing changes there is fairly difficult. And if you look at like neobanks, they're actually relying on that legacy, even though if they're saying that they don't have to rely on legacy, but they are on those networks and bank partners that they have to rely on. But what neobanks and fintech is doing, they're basically moving fast and breaking things on the front and the user experience, where banks are slower to dedicate resources and understand what's important from the product perspective. And what actually DeFi is doing, it's tackling that backend problem. So it's saying that, hey man, hey bank, you have here like infrastructure that runs like all the time here. It's governed by the community. So there's different kind of operational risk, you could argue less or more, and then you can build whatever experience you want to your end users, and you can provide like competitive services and rebalance portfolios and do all kinds of interesting stuff. So I agree.
And you can also you end up reducing the risk profile of the bust factor, because some of these banks, they have something that it's been that way for 30 years, and now all of a sudden there's one or two people who are mission critical to some function working across the entire bank, versus if the more you can offload to open source protocols on the back end, like there's a ton of people that are incentivized to keep that working.
Yeah, I agree. Like, and especially with the incentive models, that's the game changer. I think just like, and it's a culture thing, right? So let's say there are multiple blockchains at the moment, and only a few of them actually have some sort of like wide culture of developers and not just developers, but kind of like everything. And I think it's not easy to create this kind of like a community. And like many are asking like how Aave built the community so fast. But the truth is that we didn't build it fast. It took us over 3 years and more, actually 4 years to build. And it's a slow game, and it takes time. But it's super cool to still meet people who have been like from the day one and following us and what we're doing, and just seeing like how a brand grows. It feels good to see people still like they like the direction we're going, and we do like a lot of kind of we try to pivot. We try to always like think what the narrative is tomorrow, and also kind of like be part of that story, and we take a lot of risk, like in terms of ideas.
Right. So you say people think it's gone fast, whereas you say like, well, we've been doing this for 3 years. It's been a long journey. When it comes to like money on the platform, it's like a slow thing, and then all at once, right? And you did an interview with Laura Shin where you're talking about how you were talking about what if we hit 30 million or something in the platform, and then all of a sudden there's billions of dollars. There was as much as $6 billion locked in Aave within the last couple of weeks. It fluctuates a lot, but in July 2020, so in only a 6-month time span, you've gone from, 100 million to many billions. So like a 40x multiple of dollars in the ecosystem. How does that adjust like your entire mindset about your roadmap, what you prioritize, what's most important? Like what is that? How does that shift your mindset?
Yeah, it does shift quite a lot because in one way you like the more the more assets you have in the protocol as a community, the more responsibility that community has, which means that if you build something and expect that, let's say 30 million worth of funds will be there, uh, and thinking different kinds of edge cases and so forth, and ends up having billions or tens of billions or hundreds of billions, uh, it puts you into a different kind of mindset, in a mindset that stakes are getting high, need to be careful what risk parameters the community is voting upon. And this is something I personally am scared quite a lot. Let's say that do people understand in the community always that they are like if they like an asset, but do they understand the risk that they're voting? And they're doing a pretty good job on it. And I'm super surprised because we always lived in a narrative that we have financial professionals and these are folks that can assess risk and assess like what kind of exposures should be there. And this is basically the narrative that led us to 2008. And now we have a narrative where we have just smart people with different backgrounds coming together, thinking, what kind of parameters there should be in a protocol, what kind of features should be built, what's happening in other communities, how communities can work together. It's more fascinating story, and I think like it's part of the reason that DeFi is growing because you have vast amount of people that they can actually be a decision maker and they have a voice. And compared to if you go to traditional financial institution and get bad service or you don't like something, like if you complain, would move the needle at all. But in DeFi, especially this early, it can move a needle.
Yeah. One of the things that interests me is, especially as you get more people with more money that come in, relatively mundane things that you maybe think about a little less early on as you have more, I don't know, call them DeFi native people. They kind of know what they're doing. They go and borrow or they deposit. More and more you get more of like a layman person's experience, and your user interface or your vocabulary on the website can end up making these enormous differences. Like, what is the tolerance that I can borrow? Like when I borrow X percentage, like what's the tolerance? What's my risk of liquidation? And all of that stuff can end up having massive impacts on the outcomes, especially when, unforeseen circumstances, not that, volatility is always to be expected, but when it comes, it always hits us by surprise. And, people are like, oh man, I got liquidated on this borrow or whatever. How much have you experienced and learned, like, how big of a deal these little interactions, user interfaces, like how important they are?
So the volatility is the reason you have red lights there.
Yeah, I've got the red lights today. If it was an up day, I'd turn on the green lights, we'd get green candles, but today's just not that kind of day, and it happens sometimes. So, we've got the red lights for the down day, but we're still happy. We're still doing pretty well this year. So, yeah.
You need to have this kind of like neon violet color, purple a bit, the Aave color as well.
Hey, I think I've got...
That's the market neutral.
Here we go. We've got...
Oh, that's nice. That's pretty cool. That's amazing.
We've got some Aave colors here now.
Super cool. Yeah, I think so there's this narrative in understanding like what Bitcoin has been, and Bitcoiners and people who are in blockchain in general have been advocating if it's not your keys, it's not your crypto.
Yeah.
This idea, and like end of the day, like if you think about DeFi, Ethereum, they're a bit of like decentralized finance. They are actually, and now DeFi that is on Ethereum is just like smart contracts built on that layer on top of the network nodes that are running the software. And by the underlying network, Ethereum has it has it has inflation. It's a financial system in one way because it has reward mechanism, financial transactions, and so forth. And I felt like the similar extent as we educate folks that if you lose your keys, you lose your crypto. In the same way, we should educate that these are smart contracts. Whatever you're interacting, the rules are built into that smart contract. So before you do anything, you need to understand what you're doing. That's one thing. And then there's the other thing is when people come, they don't like to read, they don't know how to read contracts. Even if someone puts a description in plain English, let's say what the contract is doing, the smart contract, and by reading it you understand what's going to happen, still people might take risk. And this is the kind of like a challenge. So the question is like, to what extent people need to take their own responsibility, and why it's an important question now than ever before is that when we look at what's happening with Wall Street bets, Robinhood, I think we have a generation now, and younger generation in kind of a mindset that you want to do whatever you want to do. And finance has been always a bit reverse to that idea because traditional finance is based on intermediaries, middlemen that regulators want to protect the end users from bankers, let's say, and asset managers that take excessive risk and so forth, and take custody of their funds. So that's one thing. And now we have a system where you don't have those intermediaries. You can interact directly with contracts that can only do exactly what they promised to do. So you don't have this kind of risk of contracts not being abating. So the next question is like, should you be allowed to take excessive risk if you want to, or should you back a company that is going to bankruptcy? And this is a good reminder. Companies like Tesla, SpaceX went nearly to bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And today and tomorrow they might become, especially SpaceX, might become the most important link in so forth. So there's just an example, and there's many stories out there. And the question here is like, should you take risk? Should you be allowed to do what you want to do, or should there be actual limitations for you?
Yeah, this gets me pretty directly into a big thing that I want to talk about, which is there's kind of two elements of it. One is, do you think all of the primary, I call them like blue chips of DeFi, are going to end up kind of vertically integrated, offering a bundle of products so that when you go to Aave, it's not just, lending and borrowing, but it's a lot of things that maybe a bank does, or like kind of becoming the hub for the decentralized finance experience. And then the second would be, as part of that, if that's true, how soon especially do you think something like partially collateralized loans could exist? Because that's like this giant unlock of value in the world, right? Where someone seeking to borrow, they can't fully collateralize it. So then you have to bring in these decisions, right? It's less deterministic. When you're over collateralized, it's pretty, it's a well-known relationship. If you lose your collateral, then your ability to borrow is revoked. You lose some of if you lose your collateral. If your margin ratio gets to a certain point, your collateral is taken as payment instead. When you get into partial collateralization, just the idea of approving a loan, there's this whole governance or decision-making thing that's involved in that. And I'm just curious, do you have any big brain ideas on how something like that could even work in DeFi, or does it just require human beings? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I like the WordPress. You had the WordPress, kind of like a what is it like?
Yeah, it's a coaster. Yeah. I'm just fidgeting with stuff.
Yeah. and yeah, so Yeah, so I would say like in that sense, the under like I would say the first question about the whether could offer more than lending and borrowing, yeah, as Aave. I think what Aave is trying to achieve is that we don't build DeFi, we build culture in the sense that we want to empower everything that finance empowers today, but do more efficiently.
Mm.
And I think that will happen over time. So I think our community uh, definitely is kind of like accustomed to the idea that we have this ability to expand in places where you could have where decentralized finance can empower, and that's important. So part of building that culture, that you're more than finance is important because first of all, life is more than finance, uh, and most of the cool stuff happens outside of finance. Finance just enables more people to do cool stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and I would say yes, but just saying like double yes, that probably will do something more than that. And then, uh, uh, yeah. So, what was the second question?
The second was specifically to like partially collateralized
Yeah,
loans.
yeah, yeah. So, in terms of the partial collateralization, I think that will happen. So we have now very interesting function, the credit delegation in Aave. And what that means is that you could delegate as a depositor collectively or by individually credit to someone else that you trust, or a wallet that borrows partially collateralized and partially uncollateralized and so forth. But what it allows you to do is that the protocol doesn't take the risk, but the depositors can choose to take excess risk, which is way better than a protocol governance deciding that, hey, let's take some risk, and worst case scenario, there might be a loss of 40 million or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not fair for all of the depositors that are not following the governance so on a day-to-day scale. And I think that's the way you get the liquidity out. And this way, if you manage to create a interesting ways to underwrite those loans, like the credit delegators, they underwrite, but you need someone to assess the risk for them.
Right.
And you don't necessarily need like off-chain recourse. That is something that we always think about. Like, okay, so we have under collateralized loans. So, but if the guy defaults, or like, how we get the funds from real life? And I think you can build a lot of things without actually going into the real life. So and actually like collecting uh, payments. That's how like a uh, like the undercollateralized lending started. You might not have anything to claim from the person.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you get those maybe regular payments or some kind of structure
Yeah.
for setting expectations on the loan. I want to dig back to something you said early on, which was bringing access, making it simple for people. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is I want to be able to do this from my phone, and I want to be able to do this. Mark Cuban was on Bankless earlier today, and he was talking about Aave, like what a great ambassador for Aave in the first place. But he talks about the most important concept that needs to get across to builders and DeFi people is how to enable people to take advantage of the product, say earning yield on dollars or something, without even having to care or know that it's on a blockchain. So like, could there just be an Aave mobile app and you load it up with a credit card or something, or a debit card, and it's all in the background that it converts it to crypto, turns it into collateral, and starts earning yield? Is that a future that you see? Is that like in the roadmap for how you want people to be able to interface with Aave?
I think that will be cool because like either like I don't know if someone could build that or connect to that, and but that would be definitely cool in the sense that like why do you like I don't think everyone needs the blockchain experience I think, let's say I'm willing to keep, uh, let's say, some of my funds in controlling the keys, but some of them I'm willing to keep on kind of like custody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's the thing. Like, and there are many people that are okay with giving the custody. They would just use the services less in terms of trust.
Whatever's the easiest.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think we need to, especially like who are not savvy with DeFi. I don't think we need to pitch too much about like, not your keys, not your crypto, but we just need to make it seamless to some public. End of the day, like there is always a DeFi user, right? So let's say even if Coinbase provide access to let's say millions tomorrow into Aave, if something like that happens, there will be a DeFi user. It would be just from one address or a few addresses instead of like millions of addresses, which is way better to move that way and have less transactions.
Yeah. Well. So one of the ways that could be done is, I don't want to use Coinbase as my example personally, but I like Rainbow Wallet. That's a wallet, an Ethereum wallet, I like it too, on iOS and Android. I interviewed Mike from Rainbow Wallet. Let's say they end up with a way for, Rainbow is kind of like your cooler, more decentralized version of a Venmo. And then within that, I'm interacting with Rainbow, and maybe they're managing, helping their customers or their wallet users get yield, but they're kind of batching all that. They're a client of Aave, but the individual users of the Rainbow wallet is not necessarily a client of Aave. They're just kind of interacting, like there's a middleman in between via the mobile application or something like that. That's kind of the more straightforward path, I guess, that you see.
Yeah, and I saw like even like a hackathon project. Someone created actually mobile experience for Aave. That like mobile app. That's pretty cool. I actually need to see how they like. There was pretty well done application in a 1 week hackathon or something, 2 week hackathon or something in Market Make, the global hackathon. And I need to check how the wallet functionality works, but that is something pretty cool.
One of the things I just run into is like, I feel like I need to guide normal people with baby steps, So when I talk to my friends and I say decentralized finance or whatever, they're kind of on board. They get it. They're like, something about these yields seems too good to be true. Maybe that's the case. But at the end of the day, I get a little nervous trying to then say, all right, now go buy crypto and then install MetaMask. Go to this website, store your 24 words, like all of that. It just gets a little overwhelming for them. And I feel like if there was a way to do the baby steps towards interacting with these, and then as you become a grown-up in the DeFi landscape, you slowly kind of maybe take over more of your experience interacting with the protocol.
Yeah, one thing I really liked what happened is that someone created this it was like, was it like DeFi 777 or something, or like so you had like a sub ETH domain. So let's say you could have something like a deposit.aave.eth, and when you send funds there, it deposits those funds. So this kind of like cool functionality, and maybe something similar could be done in user interfaces. Like why, like if you say to someone like if you're trying to explain staking Aave to the Aave safety module during Aave and backstop the risk at the Aave protocol. So explaining that to stake on stake, and how much, like maybe there should be things that are pre-configured, like press this icon, like this particular picture, and what happens is that it's kind of like a pre-made thing, that some amount of Aave gets deposited or bought from the market or whatnot, and deposited, and you get the stake and so forth. So, I think just like we need more creativity on the user experience. We have done a very good job. I mean, the space a few years ago was a bit looking at the first apps, like our first like project Eatland, looking at many of the dApps back in those days, it was just like there wasn't any user experience. It was like back end folks developing front end and designs.
Yeah, so it's like a uh, night and day from a few years ago to today, and now there's more money, more interest, and more evolution than ever. So maybe even the experience that someone could have with Aave a year from now is going to be dramatically different than what they see today. I'd like to um, I'd like to get two answers before we go. So one is short-term fixes. Do you think there are any? Are there any like bring access to Aave and other dApp tooling on the near-term horizon that can help get around some of these bottlenecks that we have in the ETH network as adoption is seems so severe? And then number two is the long-term view. But let's start with the short-term. Like, is there
I think people should
anything on the near horizon?
I think people should try state channels, like to transact a bit more in between in off chain with the state channels. That's a solution. I mean, people should try that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite good way to reduce transaction costs, especially like if you are recurring user or there's like multiple transactions coming going. That's something people should try to look into.
Yeah. And then let's finish with especially if like it's something that you don't know that people would expect, like what Aave looks, you said 3 years ago, so let's say 3 years from now, like something that you feel like will be considerably different than what people may have on their mind.
Yeah, I guess like the main difference probably is that you will kind of like see the vision that that Aaves is bigger than like finance, in the sense not that bigger in the scale I would say, but just like that kind of like there's more problems to solve than finance, but solving finance helps to solve the other issues, make efficient and do cool things. And this is something that people will see.
What kind of thing do you think in that regard, like solving what?
Well, the thing is that at this current state, like we're using blockchain and like creating just like an on-chain economies, I would say, and DeFi is one of them. But there's multiple different economies coming into the on-chain world, and onboarding through fiat into the Ethereum, Aave, or whatever you are getting into stablecoins. That will be a very small gateway. End of the day, there will be other more interesting ways to get involved.
I see what you mean. And in terms of getting involved, you mentioned governance before we started. So what does the governance roadmap look like in terms of really getting participants of Aave fully involved in the future of the platform?
Yeah, so now we are focusing on building like governance experience. So we released recently the version 2 of governance, and that allows you to delegate voting power, delegate separately proposition power. So you could delegate proposition power to a developer, voting power to protocol politician, and create different voting strategies if you have multiple tokens to vote. And Aave ecosystem does have. So we have Aave, we have staked Aave, we have Aave, so which is the deposit collateral Aave. So it's very flexible. But now what we want to do is that we create better experience on submitting, like in user interface, on submitting, creating proposals, and also being able to campaign in the user experience there in the application for proposition power and voting power. That's pretty cool because you will have leaderboards there where you actually see like who delegated to what's the cause there, and what's the idea, and that's kind of like our plan. And of course, the grants program is something we're working now and trying to figure out within the community how to kickstart it and proceed with that.
What do you have in mind in terms of the grants program? Like where would you like to see some of that energy go, some of those funds go to supporting?
I don't have any particular kind of like thing. I think maybe some stuff could be solved is privacy related kind of like a research and developments and building more features into the protocol, building some interesting stuff. Definitely, that's one of the things, and of course, improving the protocol, like actually the whole base layer protocol. So this is the main thing.
Yeah, awesome. Stani, I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you. I learned a lot about Aave today. You know, I'm a speculator first, but I have used the protocols as well. So I get excited about it once I use something, and then I want to be a speculator and a trader. But I feel like I have a much better fundamental understanding of what's happening when I get to talk to somebody like this. So I really appreciate you being on and joining us.
Yeah.
If people want to keep up with everything that you have going on, they can go to Aave.com, and then is Twitter the next best place?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, yes.
And I'll put that in the show notes for people to check out. Thank you so much for being here. It was a real pleasure. And for anybody listening, don't forget that you can try Matcha today. Thanks to Matcha for being our partner for this episode to trade tokens like Aave and other assets. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Just run dry in a house of cards. I feel the breeze wound so tight.